This gives you a clue into why Mamdani is doing so well.
It is okay. Is it okay that our neighbors are getting taken off the streets by ICE? Is it okay that gender affirming care is being taken from young people who really need it to survive? Is it okay that the Supreme Court has now justified racial profiling? That's not how I want to treat my neighbor.
Now, Douglas, some may characterise that woman as an awful, that's an affluent white female leftist, and that is a powerful voting bloc. They're among Mamdani's most committed supporter base, and they can turn elections. You look at the demographics, you look at the voting patterns, and that bloc votes very left in a very consistent manner.
Yeah, in fact, of course, it's similar types of politics that are actually responsible for the government shutdown at the moment. The
Mm.
Republicans and the Democrats are at loggerheads on one issue in particular, which is whether or not illegal migrants into the US should be given health care. And that's the sort of position that many Democrats, frankly, have found themselves in, is supporting things which even 15, 20 years ago would have been absolutely disastrous policies for the left to push for. If you went back to the 1990s and had a very successful Democratic president like Bill Clinton, if he'd have said, yes, we should have open borders and anyone who breaks into the country should be given superior health care effectively to many Americans, people would have said, do you want to not get elected? But there has been this extraordinary shift on the left. It's true there's been a shift on the right as well, but there's been an extraordinary shift on the left in recent years. And just consider this, that look at the priorities of that woman. I mean, gender affirming care, please, when it is to do with one of the world's great cities, perhaps the world's great city, staring into the face of democratic socialism, and you're saying, let's not talk about the economy, let's not talk about the illegal immigration, let's not talk about the crime, let's not talk about the homelessness, any of these things. Let's talk about gender affirming care. Normally, that is the sort of thing that would make a party and a candidate totally unelectable. Yet, weirdly, we do have, as you mentioned, Rita, this strain of people for whom there is just never a cause too progressive that they don't want to die on the hill of
Mm.
it.
Even if it hurts them personally, that's what's remarkable, particularly with these affluent, overwhelmingly white leftist women backing the most radical elements of the trans agenda. Now, to contrast from that, we have an increasing number of young people, college kids, who are rejecting leftism and rejecting it loudly, Douglas. You wrote about this phenomenon in the New York Post.
Yes, that's right, Rita. There was an event in Mississippi just last week, organized by Turning Point USA, and at this university, more than half the student body registered to attend the event, and there were crowds growing in the street, from queues forming from the break of day till the end of day to get into the event. It was not least, I suppose, was the draw of the Vice President J.D. Vance, but actually it's something that Charlie Kirk and Turning Point have tapped into. Other groups have as well, PragerU and others in the United States. They've realized that a lot of older conservatives effectively gave up on the younger generation, effectively sort of decided that, well, everyone goes through this liberal period, at least for a time, and they do it when they're young, and we'll try to speak sense to them and they'll get it when they grow up. And Turning Point and a few other organizations have realized, actually, no, there are lots of reasons why young Americans, like young Australians, young Brits, and others, should be voting to the right and should be interested in
Mm.
conservative policy. And among them, of course, the most striking is the fact that many of the things in our societies, do not work for the young. And again, the left has its explanations for that. It will always say things like, well, that's because we've got to tax the wealthy more or whatever. But there are many other arguments that can be made too, conservative arguments, not just on issues that affect the socioeconomic status of young people, but also that address their urge and their desire for meaning in their lives. I'm very struck by the fact, I think you said this before, Rita, that I'm very struck by the Christian element in parts of the young American right. And it's part of what I see as being a deep hankering for real and substantial things to be back on the table again. The left has been very good at talking about not just specific things, but grandiose things. They talk in terms, as I've often said, of resentment, for instance. But there are other things that can be offered to young people as well, such as, again, something I've argued a lot over the years, such as urging them toward a position of gratitude towards the things that are good in their society, to recognize the things that do work in our countries, that make our countries great, have made our countries great, and which we can have pride in. I see things like this as just little signs, quite big signs, you might say, of a change in the generation coming up. And I don't think that generation should be in any way abandoned by conservatives. I think it should be spoken to by them.
Douglas, I hope conservative politicians in Australia are listening to you, because too many on the so-called centre-right here seem to think if young people vote left, then we must veer left instead of actually arguing our positions. Now, you also noted in this New York Post piece that there's been a dramatic drop in the number of young people identifying as trans. In 2022, almost 7% of undergraduate students polled in the US identified as trans. Last year, the figure was 3.6%. It seems like the social contagion is over, but here in Australia, we remain an outlier when it comes to trans madness. And here's another example. Parents of kindergarten-aged children in Queensland are being asked if they want they-them pronouns for their 4-year-olds. Douglas, there you go, non-binary 4-year-olds. How do parents combat this activism?
No, I mean, the first thing is, of course, that you seize exactly the right term there, Rita. It's a social contagion. There may be a very tiny number of people, probably are, as I've always said, a very, very tiny number of people who genuinely suffer from gender dysphoria. But most of what we have seen in recent years has been a social contagion, which has been fueled by several things. One, of course, is by the media. But more importantly, it's been the social contagion pushed where it's been deemed to be bad to be a man, to be bad to be heterosexual, to be bad to be white, and if you add all of those things together, then if you are somebody who is, I mean, it's the same to a certain degree with women as well, but they've got sort of one little niche more on some of the social justice hierarchy, pyramid, grievance in some people's views, unless you have conservative views, obviously, in which case you're back to being a non-woman again. But just bear with me for a moment. The point is that if you deem these things to all be bad, you will encourage some people to try to find a place on the victim hierarchy pyramid. And identifying as genderqueer, non-binary, and so on has been, in recent years, clearly one of the ways in which some young people have tried to do that. If you add on to that the fact that many of them have literally been miseducated into believing that, for instance, sex is a spectrum and we're all on a sort of, slippery slope, we can go up or down, and sometimes you're a bit male, and sometimes in the afternoon after a cup of tea you're a bit female, and that anyone cares. That's the other thing. And not just anyone cares, that everybody should care. Of course, some people are going to try to tick that box. It's just very interesting, this stat, Rita, that shows not only a halving of the number of people identifying as, gender non-conforming and so on. In some places, it falls by 2/3. I think a lot of people have just realized that all that stuff was the peak of what was sometimes called wokeism. It was the peak of the social justice hierarchy, intersectionalism thing. And thank goodness, maybe we're starting to see it in the rear view mirror finally. As you say, apart from in Australia, I would say to the parents of any parent who sends their kids to a kindergarten like that, teach the children to read and to know what a noun is and a verb is, and so on, before you instruct them on what a pronoun is. Maybe wait till they're 18 to talk about that, the gender crazy, or at some point later, but teach them reading and writing first, because those are the things that are going to be skills in their lives. And all of this pronoun stuff, apart from being uniquely boring and so on, it is a way to just avoid doing anything real in the world. Obsess about what pronouns you put in the bio, and then you don't have to do any work that day. I really hope that Australia stops being the outlier it is at the moment on this issue.
Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Great pleasure as always.